The massive golden doors of the Galactic Council chamber slid open with a soft hiss. Ambassador Sarah Chen walked through them, her simple black uniform looking plain next to the flowing robes and glittering armor of the other representatives. She carried a basic data pad in her hands, the kind that most species had stopped using centuries ago. Around her, beings from across the galaxy chatted in small groups. The tall, blue-skinned Altarians spoke in musical tones about their latest ship designs. Their vessels were works of art, sleek and beautiful, capable of crossing star systems in days. Near them, representatives from the Zephyri Collective discussed their bioships, living creatures the size of cities that could heal themselves and grow stronger over time. Sarah took her seat in the small section marked for Earth. The human delegation consisted of just 3 people. While most other species brought dozens of advisors and experts, she looked around the enormous chamber, trying to appear impressed by the technology that surrounded her. Floating screens showed star maps, holographic displays demonstrated new weapons, and translation devices that could process thousands of languages at once hung in the air like jewels. "The meeting will now begin," announced Council Speaker Vextar, an ancient being whose species had ruled the galaxy for over 1,000,000 years. His voice echoed through the chamber without any visible amplification system. "Today we discuss the growing tensions between the Korthak Empire and the Verdanian Federation." Sarah activated her recording device, a clunky metal box that drew amused looks from nearby delegates. She pretended not to notice their reactions. Let them think humans were still struggling with basic technology. It was better that way. The Korthak representative stood up, his red armor gleaming under the chamber's lights. He was 7 feet tall with 4 arms and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. "The Verdanian Federation has technology that belongs to all species," he declared, his voice booming across the chamber. "Their space-folding drives could revolutionize galactic travel, yet they hoard this knowledge like greedy children." The Verdanian delegate rose to respond. She was small and graceful, with silver skin that seemed to glow with its own light. "Our technology is the result of thousands of years of peaceful research. The Korthak Empire seeks to take by force what they cannot create through wisdom." Arguments broke out across the chamber. Some species supported the Korthak position, believing that advanced technology should be shared. Others sided with the Verdanians, defending their right to control their own discoveries. Sarah watched it all, taking careful notes on her primitive data pad. What none of them knew was that every word spoken in this chamber was being transmitted across space to a place they could never imagine. Hidden in the Oort cloud of a dead solar system, the massive hull of the Terra Invicta received Sarah's signal. The ship was so large that weather patterns formed on its surface. Entire cities existed within its armored shell, and forests grew under artificial suns in its vast interior spaces. Admiral Helena Vasquez stood on the command deck of the Terra Invicta, watching the council session on a screen that stretched across an entire wall. Around her, thousands of officers worked at stations that controlled systems beyond the imagination of most galactic species. The command deck alone was larger than most space stations. "The Korthak are getting aggressive," said Commander Park, Vasquez's second in command. "Our intelligence suggests they're planning something big." Vasquez nodded, her eyes never leaving the screen. "Sarah's doing good work. The Council still thinks we're just simple explorers barely capable of reaching our own moon." She smiled grimly. If only they knew the truth. The truth was that humanity had been preparing for this moment for over 200 years. While other species had focused on making faster ships or prettier cities, humans had thought bigger, much bigger. They had found rogue planets drifting in the empty space between stars and had spent decades hollowing them out, turning them into mobile fortresses that dwarfed anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Terra Invicta was just one of 13 such vessels. Each one was unique, built from a different type of planet and designed for specific purposes. The Olympus Mons had been constructed from a metal-rich world and served as the primary weapons platform. The New Britannia was a former ocean world whose vast water reserves had been converted into the most advanced manufacturing facility in known space. Back in the council chamber, the debate continued to grow heated. The Korthak representative slammed one of his 4 fists on his desk, causing several smaller species to jump in their seats. "The Korthak Empire has been patient long enough. We demand access to Verdanian space-folding technology within 1 standard galactic month. And if we refuse, asked the Verdanian delegate, though her glowing skin had dimmed with worry. Then we will take what should belong to all species, the Korthak replied coldly. Sarah continued to record everything, her face showing just the right amount of concern and confusion that other species expected from a human. Inside, however, she was calculating how long it would take the planetary battleships to reach Verdanian space if needed. The Terra Invicta could be there in 3 weeks. The others would follow shortly after. The meeting ended with no resolution. As the delegates filed out, several approached Sarah with what they thought was friendly advice. Your species should stay out of this conflict, warned the Altarian representative. Human ships are not built for real warfare. We appreciate your concern, Sarah replied politely. Earth just wants peace in the galaxy. Another delegate, from a species of insect-like beings, clicked his mandibles sympathetically. Perhaps humans should focus on improving your technology before worrying about galactic politics. We have seen your ships. They are very basic. Sarah thanked them for their wisdom and made her way back to her small transport vessel. It was indeed basic, barely capable of faster-than-light travel and looking like it might fall apart at any moment. The other delegates watched it depart with something between pity and amusement. What they didn't see was the nearly invisible signal the ship sent as it left the council station. Deep in space, the massive bulk of the Terra Invicta received the message and began to move. Its engines, each one the size of a city, came online with a deep rumble that could be felt throughout the ship's vast interior. Admiral Vasquez stood in her command center, surrounded by holographic displays showing the positions of all 13 planetary battleships. Send the alert to all vessels, she ordered. Project Revelation may soon begin. Across the galaxy, in hiding places that no other species had ever discovered, 12 other planet-sized ships received the message. Their crews, numbering in the millions, began final preparations for a plan that had been centuries in the making. The galaxy thought it knew humanity, thought it understood their place in the cosmic order. They were about to learn how wrong they had been. The Korthak Empire was preparing for war against what they saw as a weak and peaceful species. The Galactic Council was debating with words while conflicts brewed throughout their territory. And somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, 13 worlds that should not exist were moving toward a destiny that would change everything. Humanity had been patient. They had been careful. They had let the galaxy believe what it wanted to believe about them. But patience and deception could only last so long. Soon, very soon, the galaxy would see what humans could really build when they set their minds to it. The greatest secret in galactic history was about to be revealed. The attack came without warning at dawn on Verdania Prime. The planet's 3 silver moons still hung in the pale sky when the first Korthak bioships materialized from hyperspace. They were horrible things to look at, part machine and part living creature, with hulls that pulsed like beating hearts and weapons that grew from their sides like cancerous tumors. Captain Lyra, Moon Whisper, was tending to her crystalline garden when the alarms began to wail across the capital city. She looked up to see dark shapes descending through the atmosphere, leaving trails of something that looked like blood in the sky. Her people's defense fleet was beautiful to behold, ships that looked like flying cathedrals made of living crystal, but they were built for peace and exploration, not war. The battle was over in 6 hours. The Verdanian crystal ships, despite their elegance and advanced technology, shattered like glass before the Korthak assault. Captain Moonwhisper watched from her emergency bunker as her homeworld's orbital stations were torn apart by creatures that seemed to feed on the destruction they caused. The bioships didn't just destroy targets, they consumed them, growing larger and stronger with each victory. Across the galaxy, every species with access to long-range communications watched the horrific broadcast. The Korthak Empire had made good on their threats, and they did it with a brutality that shocked even hardened military commanders. Emperor Thrak himself appeared on the transmission, his forearms spread wide as his bioships fed in the background. "Let this be a lesson to all who would deny the Korthak Empire," he declared, his voice carrying the confidence of absolute victory. "The Verdanian space-folding technology is now ours. Any species that harbors their refugees or aids their resistance will face the same fate." In the Galactic Council chambers, emergency sessions were called immediately. The ancient speaker, Vextar, looked older than his million years as he addressed the gathering. "This aggression cannot stand," he announced. but his voice carried the weight of someone who knew his words were hollow. "We must mobilize our peacekeeping forces immediately." Ambassador Sarah Chen sat in her small section, watching the debate unfold with the same expression of concerned confusion that other species expected from humans. Inside, however, she was transmitting everything to Admiral Vasquez aboard the Terra Invicta. The message was simple. The Korthak had crossed the line. It was time for Project Revelation. Light years away from the political chaos, Admiral Helena Vasquez stood before the largest holographic display ever constructed. It showed the entire galaxy, with each of the 13 planetary battleships marked as small blue dots hidden in the vast darkness between stars. Around her, the command center of the Terra Invicta buzzed with activity as millions of crew members prepared for the largest military operation in human history. "Confirmation from Earth Command," reported Commander Park, reading from a secure transmission. "Project Revelation is approved. All restrictions are lifted." Vasquez nodded grimly. For 2 centuries, humanity had built in secret, preparing for the day when their deception would have to end. That day had arrived sooner than expected, but they were ready. "Send the activation codes to all planetary vessels." It's time the galaxy learned what humans can really build. The first ship to move was the Olympus Mons, hidden in the shadow of a gas giant in the Centauri Nebula. For 50 years, it had pretended to be nothing more than a large asteroid, its surface carefully sculpted to look natural. Now massive engines the size of mountains came online, and the ship that had once been Mars itself began to move under its own power. Commander Sarah Kim stood on the bridge of the Olympus Mons, watching as her ship's disguise fell away like a shedskin. What had appeared to be a rocky, lifeless world now revealed itself as the most heavily armed vessel in galactic history. Weapon systems that had been hidden beneath fake craters emerged from their concealment, and engines that could move planetary masses roared to life. "All systems showing green," reported her weapons officer. "We are ready for combat operations." "Set course for Verdanian space," Kim ordered, "and send a message to the other ships. Tell them it's hunting season." One by one, across the galaxy, the other planetary battleships began to emerge from their hiding places. The new Britannia powered up its drives from behind a cluster of dead worlds where it had posed as just another lifeless planet. The Siberian Colossus, which had spent decades disguised as a large asteroid in a mining field, activated systems that dwarfed the output of most star systems. Each ship was unique, built from different types of worlds and designed for specific roles in humanity's grand strategy. The Amazon Fury had been constructed from a jungle world, its biolabs capable of producing any biological agent or healing compound needed by the fleet. The Nordic Thunder was a former ice world whose frozen surface concealed manufacturing facilities that could build entire starships in a matter of hours. As the massive vessels began their journey toward Verdanian space, their movement sent ripples through the galaxy's sensor networks. Long-range monitoring stations detected impossible readings, planetary masses moving under their own power, exhibiting energy signatures that suggested artificial construction on an unimaginable scale. The first reports were dismissed as sensor errors. Planets didn't move by themselves, and the energy readings were so massive that they had to be some kind of natural phenomenon. But as more and more stations confirmed the same impossible data, panic began to spread through galactic intelligence networks. On the Altarian homeworld, Senior Admiral Cathera stared at the readouts with disbelief. "Run the calculations again," she ordered her staff. "These readings suggest artificial objects with the mass of small planets, all moving toward Verdanian space." "The calculations are correct, Admiral," replied her science officer, his normally musical voice strained with worry. "We are detecting 13 separate objects, each with a mass comparable to a terrestrial world, all exhibiting clear signs of artificial propulsion." The Zephyri Collective's bioships began picking up the massive energy signatures as well. Their living vessels, sensitive to all forms of life and energy, recoiled from the readings like animals sensing a predator. The ship creatures themselves seemed afraid of whatever was approaching, their normal songs turning into worried harmonies. Back in the council chambers, emergency reports were flooding in from across the galaxy. Species that had existed for millions of years were struggling to understand what their sensors were telling them. The readings defied everything they thought they knew about spaceship construction and engineering. "The objects appear to be artificial," reported the Council's chief science advisor, a being so old that his species had forgotten his original name, but the scale is beyond anything we have ever imagined. If these readings are correct, someone has built ships the size of worlds. Speaker Vextar felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature. Who has the technology to construct such vessels? The question hung in the air without an answer. Every major species accounted for their fleets, and none had the capability to build anything approaching this scale. The Altarians were master shipbuilders, but their largest vessels were only a few kilometers long. The Zephyri could grow ships from living tissue, but even their greatest bioships were smaller than most space stations. Ambassador Sarah Chen listened to the growing panic with the same confused expression she had worn for years. When asked directly about the mysterious readings, she shook her head with apparent bewilderment. Earth scientists are as confused as everyone else, she said. Our best guess is that these are natural phenomena we don't understand yet. It was a masterful performance. Even as the galaxy's greatest minds struggled to comprehend what they were seeing, humanity's ambassador continued to play her role as the representative of a primitive, struggling civilization. The deception that had taken centuries to build was holding even in the face of impossible evidence. But time was running out. The planetary battleships were accelerating toward Verdanian space, and soon their true nature would be impossible to hide. Admiral Vasquez stood in her command center, watching the fleet's progress on displays that showed tactical information across light years of space. Estimated time to arrival? She asked. The Olympus Mons will reach Verdanian space in 72 hours, Commander Park replied. The other ships will follow at intervals over the next week. Vasquez nodded. Soon, very soon, the galaxy would discover that they had been catastrophically wrong about humanity. The species they had dismissed as primitive explorers had built a fleet capable of reshaping the balance of power in the galaxy. The Korthak Empire was about to learn that their victory over Verdania had awakened something they were not prepared to face. The storm was gathering, and at its heart were 13 worlds that should not exist, carrying weapons that defied imagination and crews that numbered in the millions. Humanity's greatest secret was about to be revealed in the most dramatic way possible. Commander Zethak of the Korthak Empire was enjoying his victory feast when the impossible readings first appeared on his ship's sensors. He was aboard the bioship Fleshrender, one of Emperor Thrak's most powerful vessels, currently feeding on the remains of a Verdanian defense station. The ship pulsed with satisfaction as it consumed the crystalline materials, growing stronger with each bite. Commander, called his sensor operator, a young Korthak warrior eager to prove himself. We're detecting a large mass at the edge of the system. Initial readings suggest it's a rogue planet, probably drawn in by the system's gravity. Zethak barely looked up from his meal of victory. Verdanian flesh tasted like starlight and music, and he was in no mood to be bothered by astronomical phenomena. Mark it on the charts and ignore it. We have more important things to worry about than wandering rocks. But the readings kept getting stranger. The object was massive, easily the size of a terrestrial world. But it was moving too fast and too purposefully to be a natural body caught by gravity. Worse, it was heading directly toward their position with the kind of precision that suggested intelligent control. Commander, the sensor operator called again, his voice now tinged with worry. The object is decelerating. Sir, planets don't decelerate. Zethak finally turned his attention to the displays, his four eyes narrowing as he studied the data. What he saw made no sense. The mass readings were consistent with a small planet, but the energy signatures were unlike anything in the Korthak database. Massive power sources were operating inside the object, generating more energy than most star systems. Send a probe, he ordered. I want to know what we're looking at. The probe's transmission lasted exactly 17 seconds before it went silent. In those 17 seconds, it sent back images that changed everything. The object wasn't a planet. It was a ship. A ship so massive that weather patterns formed on its surface, so large that it had its own artificial gravity, so heavily armed that its weapon systems looked like mountain ranges from space. Impossible, whispered Zethek, staring at the images. No one builds ships that large. No one has the technology or resources. But even as he spoke, the massive vessel was powering up weapons that dwarfed anything the Korthak had ever seen. Arrays of energy cannons the size of cities emerged from what had appeared to be natural geological features. Defense systems that could shield entire continents came online with energy readings that made his ship's sensors scream warnings. The first shot vaporized 3 Korthak bioships instantly. The beam was so massive that it took several seconds to cross the space between the vessels, and when it struck, the bioships simply ceased to exist. There was no explosion, no debris field, just empty space where powerful warships had been moments before. Across the Korthak fleet, alarms began to wail as commanders struggled to understand what they were facing. The massive ship, which their databases now identified as bearing human markings, continued its approach with the inevitability of a natural disaster. More weapons came online, systems so large they generated their own local weather patterns as they charged. Emperor Thrak himself materialized on Zethak's command deck via hologram, his forearms gesturing wildly in rage and confusion. "What is that thing?" he demanded. "How did humans build something that massive?" "I don't know, Emperor," Zethak replied, watching as more of his ships were reduced to atomic particles by weapons that seemed to violate the basic laws of physics. "Our intelligence said humans could barely reach their own moons. This is beyond anything we imagined possible." The Terra Invicta had finally revealed itself to the galaxy, and the revelation was shattering everything the other species thought they knew about human capabilities. Admiral Vasquez stood on her command deck, watching the destruction of the Korthak fleet with grim satisfaction. Around her, weapons officers controlled systems that could crack planets and reshape local spacetime. "Sir," reported Commander Park, "we're receiving surrender requests from 17 Korthak vessels. Should we accept?" "Negative," Vasquez replied coldly. "The Korthak started this war with genocide. They can live with the consequences." As news of the impossible human ship spread through galactic communication networks, panic began to set in across civilized space. The recordings were clear. A vessel the size of a planet bearing human symbols equipped with weapons that made the greatest warships look like children's toys. It defied everything the galaxy thought it knew about shipbuilding, engineering, and the limits of what was possible. On the Altarian homeworld, Senior Admiral Cathera watched the footage with growing horror. Her species had been building ships for millions of years, and she considered herself an expert on what was possible in naval architecture. What she was seeing broke every rule she had ever learned. "How?" she whispered to her staff. "How did they hide something that large? How did they build it without anyone noticing? How did they even conceive of something on that scale?" Her science officers had no answers. The energy readings alone suggested manufacturing capabilities that exceeded the combined industrial output of the entire Galactic Council. The materials science required to build something that large and keep it structurally sound was beyond current understanding. Most shocking of all, the ship appeared to be fully operational, with crew and systems that suggested it had been in service for decades. The Zephyri Collective's reaction was even more extreme. Their bioships, creatures that had evolved over millions of years to sense all forms of life, were fleeing the system in panic. The ship creatures refused to approach the human vessel, their songs turning into harmony of terror that their handlers had never heard before. Back in the Galactic Council chambers, an emergency session was called as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. The chamber that had once been filled with confident representatives now hosted a gathering of shocked and frightened beings trying to understand how their entire worldview had been shattered in a single day. Speaker Vextar called for order, but his million years of experience had not prepared him for this moment. "We need answers," he declared. "How did humans develop this technology? Where did they build these vessels? How many more do they have?" All eyes turned to Ambassador Sarah Chen, who had been sitting quietly in her section with the same expression of confused concern she had worn for years. For a moment, the entire chamber held its breath, waiting to see if humanity's representative would finally drop her act. Sarah stood slowly, looking around the chamber at beings who had dismissed her species as primitive explorers just hours before. When she spoke, her voice carried a new authority that made several delegates step back in their seats. "The Terra Invicta is one of 13 planetary battleships, currently operated by the Human Defense Fleet," she said calmly. "They were constructed over the past 2 centuries in deep space, using resources and techniques that we developed independently. The primitive ships you've seen operating from Earth are maintained specifically to preserve operational security." The chamber erupted in chaos. Delegates shouted questions in dozens of languages while others simply stared in shock. The idea that humans had been deceiving the entire galaxy for centuries was almost as shocking as the ships themselves. 13? Speaker Vextar managed to ask over the noise. You have 13 ships of this size? 13 planetary battleships, yes, Sarah confirmed. Plus support vessels, manufacturing platforms, and deep space installations that you are not yet aware of. Earth Command felt it was time to end our deception in light of current events. As if summoned by her words, new sensor alerts began flooding in from across the galaxy. Long-range monitoring stations were detecting more massive objects moving through space, all heading toward different strategic locations. The new Britannia was approaching Korthak home space. The Olympus Mons was moving toward the galactic core. The Siberian Colossus had emerged from hiding and was heading toward the Zephyri border. Panic spread through the assembled delegates as they realized the scope of humanity's deception. While they had been debating politics and trade agreements, humans had been quietly building the largest fleet in galactic history. Ships that could destroy planets, move stellar masses, and apparently appear anywhere in the galaxy without warning. Why? Asked the Altarian representative, her musical voice cracking with emotion. Why build such weapons? Why hide your true capabilities? Sarah looked at her with something between pity and understanding. Because the galaxy is not a peaceful place, she replied simply. Because species like the Korthak exist, and when they decide to commit genocide, someone needs to be able to stop them. Your beautiful ships and elegant cities are wonderful, but they can't protect innocent people from bioweapons and planet crackers. The truth was finally out. Humanity had not been struggling to reach the stars. They had been preparing to protect them. While other species had focused on art, philosophy, and the refinement of existing technologies, humans had been thinking about the darker possibilities that might emerge from a galaxy filled with thousands of different civilizations. Back in Verdanian space, the Terra Invicta had finished destroying the Korthak occupation fleet. Where once there had been hundreds of bioships feeding on the remains of Verdanian civilization. Emperor Thrak of the Korthak Empire had not become the ruler of 100 worlds by accepting defeat easily. The destruction of his forward fleet in Verdanian space was shocking, but he had faced setbacks before. What he had never faced was an enemy that could build weapons on a planetary scale. That was about to change. Standing in the command chamber of his flagship, the massive bioship called Empire's Fist, Thrak studied the reports from his surviving commanders. The human vessel was unlike anything in his military database. It had weapons that could vaporize entire fleets, armor that seemed to absorb planet-killing energies, and worst of all, it showed no signs of the usual battle damage that should accumulate during combat. "Bring me the war speakers," he commanded, his forearms gesturing to his communication officers. "Call every allied species. Tell them that humanity has revealed itself as a threat to galactic stability. Anyone who aids us in this righteous war will share in the spoils of victory." Within hours, the largest military coalition in Korthak history was assembling. The spider-like Arachnari brought their web ships, vessels that could trap enemies in strands of energy. The crystalline shard dancers contributed their mirror fleets, ships that could reflect any energy weapon back at its source. Even the gas-dwelling void swimmers emerged from their nebula homes, bringing biomechanical horrors that had never seen the light of a star. But Thrak's greatest weapon was something the galaxy had not seen in over 1,000 years, the Devourer protocols. Hidden in the deepest vaults of the Korthak homeworld were bioweapons so dangerous that previous emperors had sworn never to use them. These were not mere ship killers or planet crackers. They were weapons designed to consume entire solar systems, growing stronger with every bit of matter they absorbed. "Deploy the hunger of stars," Thrak ordered his bioengineers, knowing that he was crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. "If humans want to play with planet-sized toys, we will show them what a real weapon looks like." Light years away, Admiral Vasquez was coordinating the defense of Verdanian space from the command center of the Terra Invicta. Reports were flooding in from human intelligence networks across the galaxy, showing the massive buildup of enemy forces. The Korthak were calling in every favor and alliance they had, assembling a fleet that numbered in the tens of thousands. "Sir," Commander Park reported, studying the tactical displays that covered an entire wall of the command center. "Long-range sensors are detecting some kind of biological construct approaching from Korthak space. The energy readings are unusual." Vasquez moved to examine the readings herself. What she saw made her blood run cold. The object was growing as it approached, consuming asteroids and space debris to fuel its expansion. According to the sensor data, it had started as something the size of a large ship. Now it was approaching the size of a small moon, and it was still growing. "Contact Earth Command," she ordered immediately. "Request permission to deploy Omega-level responses, and send emergency signals to all planetary battleships. Tell them we're facing Devourer-class bioweapons." The message that went out across humanity's secret fleet was one that had been prepared for but never used. Every planetary battleship commander knew about the theoretical weapons that could consume entire star systems. They had trained for this scenario, but none of them had expected to face it so soon. The battle that followed would be remembered as the largest space conflict in galactic history. The Korthak coalition arrived first, their combined fleets darkening the space around Verdanian's star. Bioships that pulsed with malevolent life, mixed with crystal vessels that gleamed like deadly jewels. Web ships cast energy nets across millions of kilometers while mirror fleets positioned themselves to reflect incoming fire back at their attackers. At the center of this massive armada was the hunger of stars, now grown to the size of a small planet itself. The bioweapon had consumed an entire asteroid belt during its journey, and its surface writhed with digestive organs that could break down any matter they touched. Tentacles the size of space stations reached out from its core, tasting the cosmic winds for new sources of nourishment. Emperor Thrak stood on his flagship's command deck, watching the approach of the human vessel with grim satisfaction. Let them come with their single oversized ship. He had brought enough firepower to sterilize 100 worlds and weapons that could devour stars themselves. "All units, attack formation," he commanded. "Show these deceiving humans what happens when they challenge the Korthak Empire." The Terra Invicta met them at the edge of the system, its massive bulk moving with surprising grace for something so large. As the two forces closed, the ship's surface began to transform once again. What had appeared to be continents and oceans revealed themselves to be weapon systems and defensive installations on a scale that defied comprehension. The first exchange of fire lit up the darkness with artificial suns. The Korthak bioships launched living missiles that bred and multiplied as they traveled, turning single shots into swarms of destroying creatures. The Arachnari web ships cast nets of energy that could trap and crush entire fleets. The Shard Dancers activated their mirror arrays, creating reflecting fields that turned space itself into a weapon. All of it struck the Terra Invicta's defensive systems and simply disappeared. Force fields that could protect entire continents absorbed energies that should have cracked planets. Point defense systems the size of mountain ranges swatted down missile swarms that numbered in the millions. Counter-battery fire from the human ship carved through enemy formations like a knife through paper. But the Terra Invicta was just the beginning. As the battle raged, more impossible contacts appeared on every sensor array in the system. The new Britannia emerged from hyperspace like a technological angel, its surface gleaming with manufacturing facilities that began producing combat drones even as it fought. Each drone was the size of a conventional warship, and the ship was producing them by the thousands. The Olympus Mons arrived with weapons that reshaped local spacetime. Gravity cannons that could crush enemies into neutron-dense spheres fired alongside energy beams that existed partially outside normal reality. When Korthak bioships tried to regenerate damage, they found that the weapons had damaged them on levels that made healing impossible. The Siberian Colossus brought the cold of deep space with it, deploying ice-based weapons that froze enemy ships solid before shattering them with sonic charges. Its surface, covered in artificial glaciers, launched projectiles made of crystallized hydrogen, moving at significant fractions of light speed. Commander Zethak, barely surviving aboard his damaged bioship, watched in horror as the human fleet revealed its true capabilities. These weren't just large ships. They were mobile civilizations equipped with weapons that treated the laws of physics as suggestions rather than absolute rules. His bioship, which could regenerate from almost any damage, found its healing systems overwhelmed by wounds that seemed to exist in more dimensions than normal space allowed. "Emperor," he transmitted desperately to Thrak's flagship, "we need to retreat. These weapons are beyond anything we can counter." But Emperor Thrak was not ready to admit defeat. "Deploy the hunger of stars," he commanded. "Let it feed on their oversized toys. Nothing can survive being consumed by a weapon that devours reality itself." The bioweapon moved forward, its massive bulk pulsing with anticipation. Tentacles that could crack moons reached out toward the nearest human ship, the new Britannia, ready to begin the feeding process that would turn the enemy vessel into raw material for further growth. What happened next shocked every being watching the battle. The human ship didn't retreat or try to avoid the bioweapon's grasp. Instead, it opened sections of its hull and allowed the tentacles to make contact. For a moment, it seemed that the Korthak's ultimate weapon would finally turn the tide of battle. Then the hunger of stars began to scream. The bioweapon's tentacles, which should have begun dissolving the human ship's hull, were instead being analyzed and neutralized by defensive systems that operated on principles the Korthak couldn't understand. Worse, the new Britannia was fighting back on a biological level, introducing viral agents and nanomachines that began converting the bioweapon's own mass into raw materials for the human war effort. "Impossible," whispered Emperor Thrak, watching as his ultimate weapon was not only stopped, but actively consumed by the enemy. Nothing can fight the hunger of stars on its own terms. Admiral Vasquez, monitoring the battle from the Terra Invicta, allowed herself a grim smile. "Clearly the Korthak never learned the first rule of fighting humans," she said to Commander Park. "We don't play by other people's rules." The battle raged for 3 days, visible from neighboring star systems as artificial suns were born and died in the conflict. The Korthak coalition threw everything they had at the human planetary battleships: bioweapons that could consume matter, energy weapons that existed partially outside normal space, gravity manipulators that could compress ships into black holes. Nothing worked. The human ships absorbed damage that should have destroyed planets, regenerated systems faster than they could be damaged, and deployed weapons that seemed to violate fundamental laws of physics. More than that, they were growing stronger during the battle. The surrender of Emperor Thrak sent shockwaves across the galaxy that were far more profound than any weapon the Korthak had ever deployed. For the first time in their violent history, the Empire had been not just defeated but completely overwhelmed by a force they had never seen coming. The images of their bioships being systematically destroyed by human planetary battleships played on every communication network in civilized space. Admiral Helena Vasquez stood in the main conference room of the Terra Invicta, looking across a table at the defeated Korthak Emperor. Thrak had lost 2 of his forearms in the final battle, and his red armor was cracked and blackened. Behind him, through the massive windows that offered a view of space, the remnants of his once mighty fleet drifted as debris fields that stretched across millions of kilometers. "The terms are simple," Vasquez said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had just reshaped galactic politics through pure force. "Complete withdrawal from all Verdanian territory, full reparations for the genocide you committed, and submission to war crimes tribunals for you and your senior commanders." Thrak's remaining eyes burned with hatred, but he was in no position to negotiate. The human ships surrounding his flagship were larger than most space stations, and armed with weapons that had proven capable of destroying anything he could bring to bear. "And if I refuse?" Vasquez gestured toward the window, where the Terra Invicta's weapon systems were still visible. Their mountain-sized barrels pointed directly at the Korthak homeworld. "Then we demonstrate why humans prefer diplomacy to warfare. Your choice." The Emperor signed the surrender documents with hands that shook with rage and fear. As he did, communication channels across the galaxy carried Admiral Vasquez's next announcement, one that would change everything about how species interacted with each other. "This is Admiral Helena Vasquez of the Human Defense Fleet, speaking to all civilized species. For over 2 centuries, humanity has maintained a policy of peaceful deception, allowing the galaxy to believe we were a primitive species struggling to reach the stars. This deception is now ended. We reveal ourselves not as conquerors, but as protectors of those who cannot protect themselves." The broadcast continued from the command center of the Terra Invicta, with the massive ship serving as a backdrop that emphasized every word. Behind Vasquez, holographic displays showed the true extent of human space. Not just the Sol system, but dozens of hidden installations scattered across the galaxy, each one representing capabilities that dwarfed anything other species had imagined possible. "The age of judging species by the elegance of their ships or the beauty of their cities is over," Vasquez declared. "From this day forward, any species that chooses genocide, slavery, or the destruction of peaceful civilizations will face the Human Defense Fleet. We do not seek to rule the galaxy. We seek to ensure that those who would rule it through violence cannot succeed." In the Galactic Council chambers, an emergency session was in progress that was unlike anything in the organization's million-year history. The ancient chamber, which had seen the rise and fall of countless civilizations, now hosted a gathering of beings who were struggling to understand how their entire worldview had been shattered in a matter of days. Speaker Vextar called for order, but his voice carried none of its usual authority. The entity that had guided galactic politics for longer than most species had existed was clearly struggling to adapt to the new reality. "We must address the fundamental question," he said, his ancient voice carrying a weight of uncertainty. "How do we proceed with galactic governance when one species possesses military capabilities that exceed all others combined?" Ambassador Sarah Chen, who had spent years playing the role of a confused and overwhelmed representative, now sat in her section with the confident bearing of someone whose deception had succeeded beyond all expectations. When she spoke, her words carried the authority of a species that had just proven it could back up any statement with overwhelming force. "Humanity proposes a new structure for galactic governance," she said, standing to address the chamber. "One based not on the size of fleets or the sophistication of technology, but on adherence to basic principles of civilized behavior. Species that choose peaceful coexistence will find humanity to be their greatest ally. Those who choose conquest and genocide will discover why we built weapons capable of cracking planets." The chamber erupted in a chaos of voices as hundreds of species tried to speak at once. Some demanded to know what other capabilities humanity was hiding. Others wanted guarantees that the human fleet would not be used against peaceful species. A few, notably the more aggressive civilizations, made veiled threats about forming coalitions to resist human dominance. All of these concerns were answered when the holographic displays around the chamber lit up with new sensor data. 13 planetary battleships were now visible across the galaxy, each one positioned near a major population center or strategic location. The message was clear. Humanity could project force anywhere in civilized space, and they had the ships to back up their diplomatic positions. The Altarian representative, Senior Admiral Kithra, was the first to fully grasp the implications of what she was seeing. Her species had spent millions of years perfecting the art of shipbuilding, and she understood better than most what humanity had accomplished. "The engineering required for these vessels," she said, her musical voice filled with awe, "represents an advancement beyond anything we thought possible." "How long have you been working on this project?" Sarah smiled, finally able to drop the act she had maintained for so many years. "Construction began shortly after first contact with galactic civilization. We studied your histories, your wars, your patterns of behavior. We realized that the galaxy was not the peaceful place your diplomats claimed it to be. So we prepared. Prepared for what?" asked the representative from the Zephyri Collective, his bioship trembling with anxiety as it orbited the space station. "For the day when peaceful species would need someone to protect them from those who choose violence," Sarah replied. The Verdanians were facing genocide. The Galactic Council debated while innocents died. We decided that was unacceptable. As the political implications of humanity's revelation spread across the galaxy, the practical effects were already becoming apparent. Species that had been planning aggressive expansion suddenly found their military advisors recommending caution. Territorial disputes that had simmered for centuries were rapidly being resolved through negotiation rather than warfare. The simple knowledge that humanity possessed planet-killing weapons and the willingness to use them was reshaping galactic politics in real time. On Verdania Prime, Captain Lyra Moonwhisper stood in her rebuilt garden, looking up at the night sky where the Terra Invicta hung like a protective moon. The human ship had not only driven off the Korthak invaders but had provided medical aid and reconstruction assistance that was helping her world heal from the devastation of the brief war. "Why help us?" she had asked Admiral Vasquez during one of their meetings. "Your people could have remained hidden and safe." "Because hiding and staying safe isn't the same as doing what's right," Vasquez had replied. "We built these ships because someone needs to stand between peaceful civilizations and those who would destroy them. Today it was the Verdanians who needed protection. Tomorrow it might be humanity. The galaxy is safer when all species are free to pursue their own destinies without fear of conquest." The new galactic order that emerged from humanity's revelation was unlike anything in recorded history. The Galactic Council remained as the primary forum for diplomatic discussion, But now its peacekeeping forces included human planetary battleships that could respond to any crisis with overwhelming force. Species that had previously settled disputes through warfare found themselves negotiating instead, knowing that any conflict could draw the attention of vessels capable of reshaping solar systems. Not all species accepted the new reality gracefully. Several aggressive civilizations attempted to form coalitions against human dominance, only to discover that their potential allies were suddenly reluctant to risk provoking a species with planet-sized warships. The few that proceeded with hostile actions found themselves facing not just humanity's military might, but the combined opposition of every species that benefited from the new peaceful order. The most significant change was in how species approached technological development. The revelation that humanity had been secretly building on scales beyond imagination inspired a new era of ambitious engineering projects. Several species began their own planetary construction projects, though none approached the scale or sophistication of human vessels. The galaxy was learning to think bigger, to consider possibilities that had previously been dismissed as impossible. On Earth, in the command centers that had coordinated humanity's greatest deception, officials finally allowed themselves to relax for the first time in centuries. The secret that had required the careful management of every human interaction with galactic civilization was finally out. No more would human diplomats need to pretend ignorance of technologies they had surpassed decades ago. No more would human engineers need to build deliberately inferior ships to maintain the illusion of primitive capabilities.